Welcome to October, my favorite and spookiest month, a month of haunted code and HTML hell. You may find yourself in Java's crypt or encountering the horror of Ruby entrails. If so, please enable automatic updates now and use only a FIDO key for MFA. After all, you wouldn't want your code editor to become ID evil. Cue the spooky laughter, which means this week we talk with Hillary Benson from GitLab about equipping developers with the tools and workflows they need to be successful at writing and building secure code. In the news segment, Apple Pay picks up a hitchhiker, the poltergeists in JavaScript prototypes, open source gets help from a ghost. A root CA expires. Static analysis takes the descent into open source, and more. Find a quiet place and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Looking to improve your web application security? Probly is reinventing web application security. Probly focuses on the vulnerabilities that matter, eliminates false positives with evidence-based scanning, and provides a simple point-and-shoot solution that is easy to use. Probly's thorough coverage ensures accurate identification of vulnerabilities in any modern web application or API. Improve your web application security processes by visiting securityweekly.com/Probly and start your free trial today. Contrast Security enables organizations to secure their applications from development to production. By embedding security sensors within software, Contrast automatically and continuously detects vulnerabilities in both custom and open source code while developers write code, providing them with context-specific how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast remediation. At the same time, by identifying only true vulnerabilities that pose risk and eliminating those that do not, Contrast empowers developers and security teams to prioritize and focus on only those vulnerabilities that matter. Learn how Contrast can help you secure your applications from development through production at securityweekly.com/contrast. Software supply chain attacks are continuing to expose vulnerabilities in organizations around the world. The time has come to focus your efforts on security for your software packages. Cloudsmith is the only cloud-native software package management solution for your enterprise. With Cloudsmith Continuous Packaging, you can securely deliver software across the globe and mitigate potential threats from entering your supply chain. With over 23+ formats supported, Cloudsmith is the solution that engineers choose to safely deliver all of their assets. Reduce unneeded downtime and deliver with confidence. Start securing your software supply chain today by visiting securityweekly.com/Cloudsmith.
This is episode 168, recorded October 4th, 2021. I'm your Crypt Keeper understudy, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella, who's back with us this episode. Hello, John.
Yay, Mr. Shima, how are you? I'm happy to be back.
I'm happy you're here, and happy you survived all of the Tales from the Crypt punification that I've done so far. Let's see if you can make it to the end of the episode. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Plus, Security Weekly listeners save 20% on digital pass registration. Visit securityweekly.com/ISW2021 to register now. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, our Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. Hillary Benson is Director of Product Management for GitLab Secure and Protect. Prior to GitLab, she served as a product executive in the container security space and led teams in building software tools and executing intelligence collection missions for the National Security Agency. Hillary lives in Los Gatos, California with her husband and 2 Welsh corgis. Hello, Hillary. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Mike. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you here, and hopefully we'll maybe get a peek at the corgis later. Who knows? But the important thing is that we do want to talk about developers writing secure code and making it possible for them. And I think the current turn of phrase is developer first security, which is sort of the same idea I think as shift left. Developers become more responsible for security, which are all great phrases to use, but maybe we should tease out really what that means. So if we do start talking about what is developer first security for writing and building software, what should we have in mind as we think about this and build out the workflows to do so?
Yeah, I think there's a few things actually. So obviously the processes that your company puts in place has to sort of accommodate this developer first approach. I think one of the key things that you want to have integrated into your processes and your sort of your DevSecOps program is the idea of implementing tooling that gives developers that ability to address issues early and often. And so there are a lot of products out there, a lot of security products that will talk about, surfacing issues in a way that makes it easy for developers to resolve, but often still requires security professionals to kind of be in the loop for that. And so one of the things that we at GitLab really approach from this perspective is to put those security issues into the tools that developers are already using. So for instance, in our product, you have the ability to surface, introduction of vulnerabilities in the actual merge request. Anytime a developer is introducing new code into the project. And so it's basically focused on only the things that individual developer can control and what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and keeps the scope of that limited to the code that they're actually introducing so that they can resolve those issues as they're going along rather than waiting for those issues to sort of make it to production and then get thrown back over the fence by security. And so a lot of what we're doing with our product is to kind of enable that type of workflow where you do surface those issues early and often.
Yeah, and that's definitely a common theme, both the aspects of early and often, as well as why don't we work within the context of who's writing the code and when they're potentially making mistakes or writing the insecure parts of code are sneaking in, or the insecure configurations for that matter. But that does talk a little bit that we're, I think, maybe taking some of the AppSec team a little bit out of the loop, since we're putting the tools in front of the DevOps team, giving them the context. So how much of this do we want to completely pull the AppSec team out of the loop? How much should we keep them in? Or maybe asking a different way, how do we maintain confidence that we are in fact still maintaining a good, secure software throughout this process?
Absolutely. So I think it's explicitly part of the goal to take AppSec out of certain parts of the process. And those parts of the process are parts where having a human in the loop doesn't necessarily add value, right? And so the idea here basically is to kind of codify what your security policies are and your organization's approach to your security program in policies, in your tooling, have as much of that automated as possible so that for those things where you know what your organization's policy is, you don't have to reevaluate that every single time a new vulnerability comes up or some other security policy is violated. Just have that automated and have the developer deal with that directly. I think that that's more efficient for the business, and it's also nicer for the AppSec team to not have to sit in the middle of every one of those little issues and spend your day processing vulnerability reports. I suppose there's a certain type of security professional who enjoys doing that, maybe, but I think most of us are sort of compelled to spend our time on more interesting things.
Yeah. No, I think it sounds too that we've talked about, in general, the industry talks about infrastructure as code, things like that. It's almost as if we're getting to a policy as code or standards as code, since, as you're saying, let's automate what we can and be smart about it. So then I think there's still going to be an aspect of AppSec needing to be a part of this process, or at least getting some feedback from developers, because there's, I think, a difference between here's a tool, developers, to find all of the potential misconfiguration issues, all the potential issues that are out of policy, out of standard, but suddenly you've got every single issue that comes up, and the developers look at that and think, wow, that's a long list. Do I have to do I have to fix every single one of these? Or what's the prioritization approach? And maybe is that a smart way to bring in, the AppSec team for their advice on figuring out what are the important ones to fix and which ones could maybe be ignore or just a fix later?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the way you handle this is you have your security team sort of define Those instances in which resolving a vulnerability, for instance, is completely straightforward and the developer should just go ahead and do that right away. For instance, it's pretty easy for everyone, I think, to get on board with the idea that if you have a CVE with a CVSS score over 7, that you should resolve that rather than introducing that in production. But if you have kind of more subtle vulnerabilities that may or may not be that big of a problem, maybe you let those things go and you sort of codify that in your tools and in your security policies. So it's very clear for the developer, this thing needs to be remediated right now, and this other thing can wait until later. And then you go ahead and you provide the visibility of those issues that remain and do make their way to production to the security team so that they can monitor what's happening with whatever that application ends up being in production, and be able to say, okay, now this issue that we didn't resolve previously appears to be problematic for whatever reason. There's some indication that someone's trying to take advantage of the application or what have you. And then you can go and prioritize that issue. And so you still have the AppSec team in the loop here in multiple ways. They're setting the policy for what is a security issue, setting the policy for what needs to be remediated immediately, and then still monitoring all of your applications in production. And still, some of those issues will move all the way to the end, and they're at the end of the pipeline, and they're running in production, and they'll have to go back and resolve those issues later. So there's definitely still a substantial role for the AppSec team at every stage of the process.
So I know GitLab, you guys really you drink your Kool-Aid. How has this worked for you guys? It's as the company has grown and become this. I think you either are public or you're about to go public. I can't remember. But as you become like a mature company, how has this sort of affected what's going on within the company, or what have you seen?
Yeah, dogfooding is a big aspect for GitLab. We do this all day, every day. GitLab using GitLab, and so we implement our own tools. Our developers use our security approvals, for instance, to determine what things they need to remediate immediately. There's challenges for GitLab, just like there are for any company. Actually getting to that process where you have really healthy hygiene and you're actually resolving these issues on a regular basis is not simple, even for a company who espouses that and says this is how we should be doing security. Mm-hmm. It's definitely a challenge, but that also means that as we're going through these things and realizing what those practical challenges are, we're implementing things in our tools that make that easier for developers and for security teams.
Cool.
Part of that I'm curious too is what does it look like? What does it look like to measure this, or to get that sense of? I asked earlier, sort of that idea: how much confidence can we have that our code is secure? But you're describing a lot of practices that internally that your own teams are doing to deal with vulns. Watch, some of them may get into prod, some of them are below a threshold of cats knocking things over off my shelf. Sorry for the noise. So I'm taking us here in sort of that direction of metrics, and so maybe let's start with internally. What are some of the things that you look at with your teams internally, just to say we're building secure code? This is actually safe to ship or good to ship now.
Yeah, you can look at a variety of things. So I think some of the things that we would look at are similar to what any organization would look at, like number of vulnerabilities that are being introduced into the code on any given day, mean time to remediation, these sorts of things. And then we track those things over time. Actually, I can go ahead and kind of share out my screen here and give you sort of an example of some of the things that we look at. Hopefully you're seeing my screen now. So for instance, in terms of things that you would look at on a day-to-day basis, the developer, as they're introducing code into their project, can take a look at, for this, this individual code change that you're making, what are the security issues that I'm introducing and where are those things coming from? So what I'm showing right now on the screen is basically a merge request in GitLab that shows this code change that you made. You're introducing something with too critical and too high and 20 other vulnerabilities, and then you can look at, okay, what exactly is causing those issues to be introduced. And so on the individual developer level, you can be tracking these things very closely, all the way up to, if you take a look at our vulnerability reports, this is something I'm showing right now, a vulnerability report in GitLab. And this is something that the security team, the AppSec team, would be able to look at and say, okay, for all of the issues that existed in this project, all the different things that developers have introduced, where are we at? And you can track things like how many of these have open merge requests that are actually resolving these issues, how many have issues created. And so you have visibility in GitLab basically from the first step of a developer introducing a vulnerability at the individual level all the way to the AppSec team being able to monitor that sort of on a broader scale.
I think one of the things is also that maybe is a little more subtle that you need to see that screenshot to appreciate is that there were multiple sources of those issues coming in. We saw DAST, SAS, container and scanning, and I think dependency scanning as well. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is that I'm pretty sure the developers don't really care necessarily what that source was, other than was this something I need to fix? Or as you pointed out, was it critical or high or something like that? So that also seems like just that smart abstraction when we talk about developer first security to make them continue to be experts on fixing code and writing code rather than experts on running tools and understanding the nuances of SAST versus SCA or things like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, as a security professional, you can spend your entire career in security and still learn something new every single day. And so the idea that you need to find ways to give developers the right amount of education so that they're enabled is you're definitely sort of dancing on a fine line with that. And so what we try to do is provide information that gives a developer sort of a sense for security and where different issues come from. And just the way that we organize the merge request, for instance, is an example. You have the vulnerability there, and that's really what the developer cares about, but you sort of also can see where it comes from. And so if you have an interest as a developer to learn about these different aspects of security, you can go and do that and say, well, what is DAST? I don't even know what that is as a developer. And they can go and teach themselves. Some of the other things that we're looking at with this is providing education, for instance, for the developer right in that merge request, again, giving them the ability to learn just the right amount of information at the right moment. So say, for instance, if you're a developer and you're introducing, a SQL injection vulnerability into your code, if you don't know what that is, you might provide some educational training that is just about SQL injection and how the way that you write code causes those issues. And so by doing that, you're keeping the security education that you're giving your developers extremely focused on things that are very related to the work that they're actually doing, and not requiring them to go and learn a bunch of stuff that may or may not be relevant to them or may require a lot of investment in gaining security knowledge that maybe they don't need actually.
So Hillary, let's see if this one goes somewhere interesting, Mike. One thing, and this is not a gotcha. This is you guys think a lot about this type of thing, so I think it could be interesting to see what your thoughts are on it. Over the last week or so, I've been thinking about different branching models, Git flow versus trunk, and things like this, from the point of view of what actually provides a smoother, more efficient development process for that end developer, right? Because we're trying to make their life easy, and we want things to be secure, but at the same time we're trying to stay out of their way. And I like Git flow because I'm able to have that a little more control over what a pull request looks like and how you do the review of it and all those type of things. But the thought from you, we're just talking about metrics. You've said here a few times you've been thinking about having just the right amount of information, not going too far. Has GitLab thought about, or are you guys doing anything around gathering metrics around how much is security, quote unquote, slowing down the development process?
Oh yeah, that's an interesting concept. In terms of slowing down, do you mean this like X amount of times we stopped a pipeline because of a security issue, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it could be that, or just like, the distraction, or compared to a pure, develop. Oh, 5 years later, we figure out we had a bug. So not so much, I'm not so much thinking about the fixing early versus fixing late, but like as we add anything into that workflow, super valuable, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, it's going to have some effect. I'm just wondering if any customers have pushed back on that, or if that's something GitLab's thought about internally, or anything around that sort of metric idea.
Sure, gotcha. Yeah, so I think the way that GitLab implements this, all of our security functionality, all of our security scans work as CI pipeline jobs. And so what you can look at here is, as these things are running on each commit, you can take a look at, okay, based on my existing security policy that I've implemented, how many times have I failed a pipeline based on some security finding? How much time are we costing the developer by doing that? And you can adjust. You can decide to not fail anything in your pipeline based on a security issue. You can have a really high bar if you want to, and you can kind of tune that and take a look at those metrics over time. So that's something very tactical, I think, in terms of slowing things down or speeding things up. You can also, I think, giving some attention to, as you're tracking kind of mean time to remediation, I think that speaks to speed as well, which it's sort of in a reverse kind of backwards way almost, in the sense that if you actually have very short remediation times, that kind of means that you're not wasting a bunch of time after you push something to production to get that issue back to the developer. So the faster that your MTTR is, the less time that you're spending across your entire crew that's involved in your software development lifecycle, because you are resolving those issues early. And so I think those are the two main things that I would point to.
Cool. I think that brings up a tangent for me, I think, as well, because we're talking about some of the what time gets added to the deployment by tapping in and adding these different tools. It takes time to run that SCA tool, that SAS tool, et cetera. But that also kind of means we're tapping into the CI/CD pipeline and potentially growing its attack surface. So I'm curious if you have some advice or some lessons learned that you all discovered as you were incorporating all of these into a very nice front end for developers to consume, but ways to make sure that build pipeline still maintains security, and all these additional tools haven't made it a little bit weaker, because regardless of using GitLab or not, that's definitely going to be a concern for any organization out there about how restrictive do we make our build environment versus opening it up to tools to easier integration with and access for developers.
Sure. So I think there's a couple things there in relation to kind of the attack surface. It just sort of depends. If you're already using these tools or you're planning on using them, any kind of, like, for instance, a SAS or DAS scanner, that attack surface still exists somewhere, right, in your environment. And so whether that is somewhere random, that the security team is managing, or if it's in your CI/CD pipeline, you still have to reckon with it. And so GitLab kind of prides itself on our ability to integrate with basically whatever security tooling you're using, so you can continue to use those tools and use us for some things, and use other tools for special purpose jobs if you want to. But we, of course, always recommend that folks use as much of our tooling as they possibly can. There's various reasons for that. Security is one of them. We pay very close attention to how we are developing our tools and ensuring that code is secure. And so that's part of it. And then I think that it's also, what was the second part of your question? It was in relation to sort of attack surface. And then what was the second part? Sorry, Mike.
I think I may have forgotten myself as well. It really was about that attack surface, or just that idea of keeping an eye on the integration, or even potentially if there are lessons learned about from that direction of, here is how we, pause for a moment, because one of the reasons I'm asking this is you were mentioning too, security education for developers. I'm curious if there's been a other direction of that type of education, as the AppSec team is getting some development education, as they're understanding smarter or better ways to integrate these types of tools so that as you're describing, it can be done securely. Yeah.
I do think that there is a meshing of sorts, especially with kind of the advent and popularization of DevSecOps. There's this meshing together of the developer and security professionals, roles and responsibilities. And so I think you have more of the traditional security responsibilities, moving left into the developer's scope. And then you have a lot of things like security automation and actually building tooling sort of seeping over into the more traditional security roles. And I think you'll continue to see that over time. It'll become more and more important for that relationship between development and security, and for the tools and approaches that they're using to become more intertwined. So I think that is an aspect of it.
That makes sense. And I think that leads to another angle of a question I'm curious about, is sort of what can the AppSec side of the house and the DevOps or DevSecOps side be striving for? And here my thoughts are more of going back to earlier on when you're describing a lot of what AppSec is doing we should probably stop. It's either boring or, more importantly, it's not adding value. So maybe pick one of those two sides to start with, AppSec or DevOps. And what do you think, either call it sort of the future holds, or what should they be striving for in terms of kind of defining roles or a charter for their team, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really does go back to what I was saying earlier about, where the roles should sit, and where the AppSec team can really add value. And so I think what you do there is you try and move as many of the things that your AppSec team is doing that are very procedural, that are very sort of administrative almost in nature, gathering vulnerabilities from somewhere, putting it in a report, pushing that back to the development team. Anytime that you are applying sort of constant logic, it doesn't really require any kind of analysis of what's going on. All of those things, to the greatest extent possible, you should try and automate in one way or another. And GitLab, of course, is a tool that can help you do that with security policies and with all of our security scanning tools. But there's lots of ways to do that, of course. And so as far as what you're doing with your security team, it's really evaluating how many processes do we have in place, how many activities are my AppSec team involved in that really require a human to sit and analyze something versus is this something that I can automate away? And then, the AppSec team can spend time on things that are, quite frankly, more interesting, right? More time on security testing and red teaming and coming up with new policies, looking at trending across what's going on at your company, focusing more on initiatives than individual issues. For instance, your AppSec team can be watching trends to see, common problems that are popping up across your company. It's common. I'll go back to the SQL injection, vulnerability example that I used earlier. Say you're seeing this not just in a one-off in an individual team, individual project, but you're seeing a lot of your developers across the company introducing SQL injection vulnerabilities. Maybe that's an opportunity to start up a kind of initiative, educational initiative, to say, here's what this is about. We see this going on frequently. Here's how you resolve these issues, and focus on things more proactively. So really analyzing what's going on with your security program, analyzing what's happening with security risk in production, and spending your time and attention on those things rather than on the sort of procedural things that are really, quite frankly, low-hanging fruit that you can automate away for the most part.
Yeah, absolutely. To use the phrase of the day, that makes sense. But I'm going to add too that it makes sense, and you're talking with us, so I think that you have some support from leadership about the philosophy behind this, about moving AppSec and DevOps teams towards this. What do you have advice for other organizations that are trying to do perhaps this type of transformation? Because I imagine it's going to be a little bit more difficult than just the AppSec team saying, we're going to stop looking for XSS and we're going to do something different, or we're going to replace. It can also be scary to hear we're going to replace the AppSec team with tools, because that doesn't. I know that's not what you're saying, but that could be something that people maybe mishear. So, what is the leadership aspect here? Or how do you get maybe buy-in to convince an org or something to point to where you can say these are the foundational changes we want to make in how we approach the building software, not let alone building software securely?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think especially this comes up a lot in the context of companies wanting to start up a DevSecOps program or operate more in a DevSecOps kind of format. And I think first and foremost, you have to make sure that your leadership team is really on the same page about why they're looking to do that and what your goals are. Because DevSecOps means something different to everyone you talk to. And so yes. I think a lot of that is because every company is different, right? And so you need different things at different companies. And so first and foremost, you need to have your leadership team really on the same page that we have ABC challenges. And as a result, we want to address that by implementing a DevSecOps program, and then need to discuss, okay, what are the processes that we're trying to put in place to achieve a DevSecOps program? What do we want that to look like? And then say, okay, what tools will help us achieve those goals? And so I think anytime you try to implement a cross-functional, cross-company initiative or program, like something like DevSecOps, which is fundamentally built on the idea that you have organizations across your company working very closely and collaboratively, you need to have that be a top-down initiative. You need to make sure that everybody is on the same page and marching in the same direction. Otherwise, do more from the
Yeah, it sounds the other part of this is that there's an important component here beyond just the technical aspects of what are the OWASP top 10, what is the OWASP ASVS, because you're describing quite a bit of communications, communicating the problem effectively to leadership. You're talking about a lot of interesting collaboration building between teams. And really, I just wanted, I think there's a question here somewhere, but mostly I just wanted to highlight that as I like how you're calling attention to that as important skills for AppSec teams to consider, to build out, so that because that I think is a key part of what this future type of deployment model, or development model looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. I think DevSecOps at the end of the day is as much about culture as it is about tooling. And so it's very important for your organizational culture and your leaders to kind of reflect the desire and the sort of values to go and implement a program like this.
No, I think so. I'm curious as we start to wrap up here. I'm curious. You've given us quite a bit to reflect on as well about choosing tools, working with DevOps. Is there a culture that you'd like to see continue to emerge, or is there particular aspects of that culture that you'd really like to encourage teams to lean into and build out good, healthy software teams rather than just the software itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that my opinions here sort of reflect my own thoughts on what DevSecOps is all about. So I'll just throw that out there. But I think the sort of collaborative attitude and the idea around making sure that you're doing everything you can to make things as efficient as possible for everyone involved in the process, right? And so I think a lot of times, it's sort of scary to say, okay, I'm going to go and educate somebody else and train them how to do ABC, XYZ, because those are things that I typically do. And so if I go and train someone else to do this, what's going to happen to my job? I think that's a common feeling for security professionals. And I know I kind of experienced that myself back in the day when I was still in the security industry. But I think that everyone can sort of reflect on what they spend their days doing, folks that are in security, and see that you spend so much time, you're so overwhelmed all the time. I don't know a single security professional who says, I don't have enough to do. So if you really try to work with folks and collaborate to say, okay, what makes sense? What's most efficient for the developer to take? What's most efficient for me to focus on as a security professional? What makes the most sense for your DevOps teams, like the folks who are actually managing your infrastructure, and really look at that collaboratively and look at the mission that your company is trying to achieve and what's best for the team and the company. And those sorts of things are sort of where you need to start. I think there's a lot there around communication and transparency, and I could spend all day elaborating on GitLab values. I think the short of my answer is go read our page on GitLab values, and you'll see what I think you need to do in order to implement sort of a healthy working culture. And I think at the end of the day, that overall healthy working culture is kind of what you need in order to be successful in building a successful DevSecOps program as well.
I think that's a wonderful message. And as predicted, we've also run out of time, even though we have tons more I think we could talk about. So I want to say thank you, Hillary, for joining us.
Thanks so much, Mike.
It was a great conversation. If you'd like to learn more about GitLab, visit securityweekly.com/GitLab. Also want to thank all of our listeners. Thank John as well. We're going to take a quick break and reanimate with news of the week.